I've hosted this show for a long time. I've shaken thousands of hands on that stage. Nervous hands, excited hands, hands squeezing mine so tight from adrenaline, I thought they'd break my fingers. But there is one hand I will never forget, a 9-year-old's hand. Cold, shaking, holding on to mine like I was the last solid thing left standing in his entire world. Before I tell you what happened, I need you to do one thing. Picture your own son, your own grandson. Now picture him standing alone on the stage, in front of strangers, about to tell the truth about a hunger he's been hiding from you for days. If that image just made your stomach drop, good. Because that's exactly what walked up to my podium that day. And what he said next, I still hear it in my sleep. This is the story of Elias Carter. Write that name down. You're going to want to remember it. It was a normal taping day, or at least it started that way. Bright lights, two families standing behind their podiums, that nervous pre-show laughter that fills the studio before the cameras start rolling. I've done this thousands of times. Give me 30 seconds with a family and I can read them. Who's here for the fun of it? Who's here because they need the money? And every once in a while, who's here carrying something they haven't told anybody yet? Elias Carter walked to that podium like he was hauling something heavier than any 9-year-old should ever have to carry. He was small, smaller than most kids his age, like his body hadn't gotten the nutrition it needed to catch up to where it should be. His shirt was clean, ironed even, but it hung 2 sizes too big on his frame. The kind of thing you buy big on purpose so it lasts longer, so you don't have to buy another one in 6 months you can't afford anyway. I've seen that trick 100 times in 100 different families. It always tells me more than the family means for it to. I smiled at him the way I smile at every kid who steps up to that podium, because that's my job, and because kids deserve one moment in their day where the world feels light even when it isn't. I leaned down and asked him the question I ask almost every child who walks up there. Buddy, if you win some big money today, what's the first thing you're going to do? It's supposed to be a fun question. 99 times out of 100, I get a kid telling me about a PlayStation or Disney World or the biggest ice cream sundae money can buy. Elias was the 100th time. I noticed the hesitation in him before he answered, the kind of pause you only see in a kid who's deciding whether to give the adult in front of him the easy answer or the true one. Most kids don't carry that decision on their face. Most kids just blurt out whatever's on their mind first. Elias stood there for a full 3 seconds, and in television time, 3 seconds of silence feels like an hour. I almost filled it myself, the way I sometimes do when a kid gets shy on camera. Something told me not to. Something told me to just wait him out. So I waited. He looked up at me, and his eyes were already filling with tears before a single word came out of his mouth. And when he finally spoke, his voice didn't shake the way a nervous kid's voice shakes on television. It shook the way a grown man's voice shakes when he's been carrying grief so long he's forgotten what it feels like not to. Sir, I just want to fix my mama. She's paralyzed. The doctor said her treatment cost $17,000 just to start. And I don't have anything. I want you to sit with that for 1 second, not a bike, not a trip, not a toy. A 9-year-old's biggest dream. The thing he thought about the entire walk up to that podium was a number, $17,000. A price tag standing between his mother and the chance to walk again. The studio went dead silent. 300 people, and you could hear the air conditioning humming through the vents. I have stood on that stage through marriage proposals. I stood there through screaming, jumping, crying tears of pure joy over a car or a vacation. I have never, in all my years on that floor, felt a room go that still, that fast. If you've ever watched a child carry weight no child should ever have to carry and felt your whole chest tighten up, stay with me because this story is far from over. If this already has you, comment. I'm still here for Elias, so I know you're with me. I knelt down so I was eye level with him. I needed him to know in that moment he wasn't talking to some TV host with a microphone. He was talking to a man who wanted to understand every piece of what he just said. He told me his father had died a year earlier. Sudden heart attack, no warning, no goodbye, just a phone call that split his entire life into a before and an after. And then he told me something that broke me even further. The grief and the shock of losing her husband had done something to his mother's body that the doctors still didn't fully understand. Stress-induced paralysis, they called it. Trauma, so severe her own nervous system simply shut a part of itself down. One tragedy had folded into a second one before the family had even finished burying the first. He told me about the morning it happened, in the plain, matter-of-fact way kids describe the worst day of their lives, because they haven't yet learned to soften it for the people listening. His father had been making breakfast. Regular Tuesday, regular eggs, regular argument with Elias about finishing his homework the night before. Then his father had gone quiet mid-sentence, sat down hard in the kitchen chair, and never stood back up under his own power again. Elias had been the one to call 911, 8 years old at the time, reciting the address off a magnet on the refrigerator because his mother had frozen completely, unable to make her mouth form the words. He said he still remembers the exact color of the paramedic's jacket. He said he still remembers his mother's scream when they wheeled his father's stretcher past her without stopping. She hadn't been the same since that morning, not right away in her legs. That came a few weeks later, after the funeral, after the finality of it all had time to settle into her body. First, it was her hands losing strength. Then her legs simply stopped responding the way legs are supposed to. Doctors use words like psychogenic and trauma-induced and conversion disorder, long clinical words for a simple truth. Elias understood better than any of them. His mother's body had broken under the weight of grief, the same way a bridge breaks under weight it was never built to hold. Now it was just the two of them. A woman who couldn't walk, and a 9-year-old who had quietly appointed himself the man of the house before he'd even lost the last of his baby teeth. He told me the rent barely got paid most months, and some months it didn't get paid at all until someone showed mercy. He told me there were nights the refrigerator held nothing but a jug of water and maybe half a jar of something nobody wanted to finish. He told me about an elderly neighbor, a woman he only knew as Miss Dolores, who quietly left plates of food on their doorstep some evenings and walked away before they could even open the door to thank her, because his mother was too proud to accept charity to her face, even when her son was the one paying the price for that pride. Some people's dignity is the only thing poverty hasn't managed to take from them yet. It's usually the last thing to go, and it goes quietly. I asked him, "And what'd you do after school, buddy, while your mama's resting?" He told me he washes cars in the parking lot for whatever spare change strangers are willing to hand over. He told me he walks the sidewalks after dark, collecting bottles and cans to cash in for a few dollars here and there. He said this to where another kid might tell me about soccer practice or piano lessons, flat, casual, like it was just his normal. Like he had no idea that other 9-year-olds spend those same hours doing homework at a kitchen table, not hunting the gutter for nickels to keep their mother alive. Then he said the sentence that took the air clean out of my lungs. "Sir, I haven't eaten in 3 days. Whatever food Miss Dolores brings us, I give it to Mama. If she gets better first, I'll eat later." A 9-year-old rationing his own hunger like a grown man triaging a disaster nobody else was there to manage. Feeding his mother first every single time and telling himself later while later never came. 3 days is a long time for a body that size to run on nothing but hope and secondhand bottle money. I dropped my car stack. I didn't plan that. My legs just moved before my brain caught up, and I was on my knees hugging that boy so hard I probably scared him a little. I had tears running down my face on national television, and in that moment, I didn't care who saw it. Some things are bigger than the show. Some things are bigger than the format we came here to film. While I was still holding him, I heard laughing behind me, actual laughing at that moment in that room. The father from the other family, the Whitfields, and I will never forget that name for as long as I live, leaned over to his 18-year-old son and said it loud enough for half the studio to hear. Classic sympathy drama. People like this don't come here to win. They come here to beg on camera. His son laughed right along beside him, nodding like his father had just said something clever. It's just emotional acting. That's how you milk free money out of people. I want you to understand something about me before I tell you what happened next. I have sat across from liars in my career. I have sat across from con artists dressed up in Sunday clothes, trying to work an audience. I know performance when I see it, and I know the real thing when I see it too. What I had just held in my arms was not performance. That was a child who had learned to survive by shrinking his own needs down to nothing, so small nobody would even notice he was disappearing. The father wasn't finished either. He kept going, shaking his head like he was the one who deserved sympathy for having to sit through this. Every season, it's the same thing. Some sob story family gets wheeled out, and the whole game turns into a charity telethon. We came here to compete, not to watch a pity party. His son leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, smirking at the camera like he expected the audience to be on his side. Honestly, at some point you gotta ask if it's even real. Kids can be coached to say anything for a payday. That last line was the one that did it. Not because it was cruel. I'd already heard cruel that day. There was the accusation underneath it, the suggestion that what I just watched, what I just felt shaking in my own arms, was somehow manufactured. I built a career reading people, and I know a coach performance from a mile away. What I had just held on to was not coached. That was a boy who flinched when I hugged him too tight because his body wasn't used to being held that gently. I let go of Elias slowly. I stood up straight. I turned around, and for the first time in longer than I can remember on that stage, my face wasn't smiling at all. Enough, I said, and I meant it with everything in me. If someone's mother's suffering is entertainment to you, then maybe you're not the ones who deserve to win anything today. The studio erupted into applause, loud enough to rattle the lighting rig, but I didn't stop the game. I looked back down at Elias and told him something I meant with my whole chest. We're not stopping, buddy. But from this moment forward, every single answer today isn't just for points. Every answer today is for your mother's life. Some people mock what they've never had to survive a single day of. If you've ever been laughed at for struggling, for asking for help, for simply trying to keep your family breathing another week, I want you to hear something clearly. You were never the joke. Type, I was never the joke, if that's you right now. During the commercial break, one of my producers pulled me aside into the hallway, and what she told me made my blood run cold before I'd even finished my coffee. She'd recognized the Whitfield name from a video that had circulated locally months earlier, one the family themselves had posted online and then quietly deleted once it started drawing the wrong kind of attention. In that video, Elias's mother, seated in her wheelchair, was struggling to reach a can off a high shelf at their neighborhood grocery store. Instead of stepping over to help her, the Whitfield father and his son had stood there filming her struggle, laughing, cracking jokes about a grown woman not being able to reach her own soup. They hadn't lifted a finger to help. They lifted a phone to film. I stood in that hallway with my fist clenched so tight my knuckles went white under the studio lights. These weren't strangers who said one careless thing in a bad moment. These were people who had already chosen cruelty over compassion once before, on camera, and gotten away clean with it until now. I made a decision standing in that hallway, and I want you to understand what kind of decision it was. I wasn't going to give them the satisfaction of turning this into a public shaming that made the story about revenge. Elias didn't need me to destroy anybody on his behalf. He needed his mother to get better. Dignity was going to win this day, not payback, because payback fades and dignity is the thing that actually lasts. We went back to tape and something in that studio had shifted. Elias played the rest of that game like a boy twice his age. Every time a new question came up on the board, I watched him think. Not about the prize money flashing on the screen, but about the look on his mother's face the day she found out she might walk again. That kind of motivation doesn't miss very often. By the time we reached fast money, the entire crowd was leaning forward in their seats. Even the strangers who walked in that morning knowing nothing about this family were quietly praying under their breath for this one child. Elias sat down in that chair for fast money, looking so much smaller than the moment demanded of him. His hands were trembling on the buzzer before we'd even started the clock. I crouched down next to him one more time and told him, just breathe, buddy. Whatever number comes up on that board, you already won something bigger than this whole game today. He played his heart completely out, answer after answer, his little voice cracking under the nerves, but never once quitting on a single question. The first question came up asking him to name something people do to save money. And without missing a beat, he said, skip a meal. So quietly that half the studio audience went silent for the second time that day before the number even flashed on the board. The second question asked him to name something a hero does. And he said, doesn't give up. And I had to look away from the camera for a second so nobody would see my face. Question after question, his answers kept circling back to the same handful of truths a 9-year-old shouldn't already know by heart. Sacrifice, hunger, waiting, hoping. He wasn't just playing a game show. He was answering with his whole life, whether he realized it or not. By the last question, his hands were shaking so hard he could barely keep them still on the podium, and I found myself gripping the edge of my own podium just as tightly, willing every number on that board to be higher than the last. Before I tell you the number he landed on, I want you to ask yourself something honestly. When was the last time you fought that hard for someone you love, even when the odds were stacked against you? If you have, if you know exactly what that kind of fight feels like in your bones, say, I know that fight right now. This next part is for you. The board lit up round by round. The audience counted along under their breath, holding it in like a single body. Elias hit a good number, a genuinely good number for a 9-year-old carrying that much pressure on his shoulders. But when the final tally locked in on the board, it still landed short of $17,000, short of the number standing between his mother and the treatment that could give her legs back to her. I watched his face crumble in real time, not because he lost the game, because in his own mind he believed he'd failed the one job he'd assigned himself the moment he walked onto that stage. He looked down at his shoes. And for a second, I saw a boy who genuinely believed he'd let his mother down in front of the entire country watching at home. I walked over and took his hand in mine. Elias, look at me, I said. You didn't come here just to win money today. You came here and taught every single person, watching what real courage looks like. Courage isn't measured by your age. It's measured by your heart. And yours, son, is bigger than this entire studio put together. Then I turned to face the cameras, and I said the words I had already decided on, standing alone in that hallway during the break. Starting today, I am personally sponsoring Elias's mother's entire treatment, every hospital bill covered in full by me personally. Elias's schooling, his books, his supplies, and a college fund that will be sitting there waiting for him the day he's ready for it. That's my responsibility now, too. The studio came up out of their seats as one. 300 people standing, and I don't believe a single one of them was thinking about the game anymore. Elias grabbed onto me and cried into my jacket, and I held that boy the way I'd hold my own son. If this story moves something in you today, if you've ever watched a child forced to be braver than any child should ever have to be, don't just scroll past it and forget. Share it. Somewhere out there right now, another Elias is quietly starving himself so someone he loves can eat one more day. Let's make sure somebody finally sees him too. I didn't see the Whitfield family again that day, not until they were walking toward the exit doors at the end of taping. The father stopped in the hallway. He didn't look proud of himself anymore. He looked like a man who had finally seen himself the same way the rest of that room had seen him an hour earlier. He walked over to me quietly, no audience left in the room to perform in front of. He said he was sorry. Not the kind of sorry people say just to save face on their way out the door, but the slow kind. The kind that visibly costs a man something to get out of his own mouth. He told me that watching Elias and hearing what my producer had uncovered about that grocery store video had made him sick with himself in a way he hadn't expected. He said he didn't know how to undo it, but that he wanted his son standing behind him to at least see him try. His son stood a few feet back, quiet, ashamed, nothing at all like the boy who'd been laughing so easily an hour before. I told him the same thing I'd tell anybody standing in his shoes. You don't undo cruelty with a single apology in an empty hallway. You undo it by becoming a different man, starting the very next morning. What you do after this moment is the only part that will ever matter. I heard months later, secondhand through people who kept in touch with that family, that the Whitfield father had started volunteering at a food bank in his own town. I don't know if that's full redemption. I don't know if a man can ever completely make up for laughing at a struggling woman in a wheelchair with a phone camera in his hand instead of a helping hand reaching out. But I know it's more than nothing. And sometimes more than nothing is exactly where real change has to start. Elias's mother began her treatment within 2 weeks of that taping. I stayed in touch with that family longer than I stayed in touch with almost anyone who's ever walked across that stage. I watched her regain movement in her legs, first with a walker, then a cane, and then, on a completely ordinary Tuesday morning with no cameras rolling and nobody filming, she took 11 steps across her own living room floor without anything holding her up at all. Elias told me later he cried harder that Tuesday than he had the entire day of the taping combined. Elias is doing what 9-year-olds are supposed to spend their time doing now. He goes to school every single day. He plays outside until the streetlights come on. He eats dinner every single night, and I mean every single night, because I made absolutely certain of that personally. Miss Dolores still brings food over from time to time, except now it isn't survival anymore. It's just a kind neighbor being kind, because she wants to be, not because a family down the street is quietly starving. Word about what happened that day made its way well past that studio floor. Local news picked it up first. Then it spread further than any of us expected, further than I think anybody on our production team was prepared for. Letters started arriving at the studio addressed simply to the boy who saved his mama. Some of them from other kids who said they'd never told anybody they were going through something similar until they saw Elias say it out loud on television. A teacher in another state wrote to tell me one of her students finally admitted to the school counselor that there was no food at home 3 days after watching a clip of that taping in her classroom. Strangers from other states reached out offering to help other families in similar situations. And out of that, a small fund was started in Elias's name to help other kids in his position get emergency support before things ever reached the point of a child rationing his own hunger to keep a parent alive. It's not a large fund. It doesn't make headlines the way bigger charities do. But in its first year alone, it quietly covered emergency groceries and medical co-pays for 11 other families nobody outside their own neighborhoods had ever heard of. The same way Miss Dolores once quietly helped his family without asking for a single word of thanks in return. Miss Dolores herself finally got properly thanked on camera on a follow-up visit I insisted on making myself. She cried harder than Elias did. She told me she never once thought of herself as doing anything special, that she just couldn't sleep at night knowing a child 2 doors down might be hungry. I told her that's exactly what makes a hero, the ones who never think they're being one. A year after that taping, I invited Elias and his mother back to the studio, off camera this time, just for me. No audience, no lights, no cards to flip. I wanted to see them with my own eyes, away from any production schedule. His mother walked into that studio on her own 2 feet. Slowly, carefully, one hand resting lightly on Elias's shoulder, more out of habit than need, but she walked in standing up, looking every bit like a woman who had clawed her way back from something that should have kept her down permanently. She hugged me for a long time before either of us said a word. Elias had grown taller. He put on weight the healthy way, the way a 9-year-old is supposed to, not carrying the hollow, thin look he'd had standing at that podium a year earlier. He told me he was playing on his school's basketball team now, that he still visited Miss Dolores every Sunday, even though she no longer needed to leave food on the doorstep, because now he was the one bringing dinner over to her instead. He said it like it was the most natural trade in the world, and maybe it was. Maybe that's exactly how it's supposed to work. Help moving forward instead of staying stuck in one direction. I asked him what he remembered most about that day on the stage. I expected him to say the hug, or the announcement, or the standing ovation. Instead, he said, I remember being scared that nobody would believe me. That answer sat with me longer than almost anything else in this whole story. A 9-year-old's greatest fear wasn't the hunger itself. It was the possibility that he'd tell the truth and the world would look at him and decide it wasn't true, or worse, decide it wasn't their problem. I made sure from that day forward that this boy would never again have to wonder if anyone believed him. I think about that boy every single time I walk out onto that stage now. I think about how close the world came to never knowing his story at all, to him carrying that entire weight alone in silence, the same way so many children do every single day without anyone ever finding out. So let me say this to you directly, because I mean every word of it. Never judge a struggling family by the clothes on their back, or the car they don't have, or the way they count their change a little too carefully at the checkout line. You have no idea what mountain they're climbing behind, the smile they've learned to put on just for you. That family standing in front of you at the grocery store, moving a little too slowly, might be fighting the single biggest battle of their entire life right in front of your eyes, and you would never even know it. And remember this too. Heroes don't always wear capes, and they aren't always fully grown. Sometimes the bravest person in the entire room is 9 years old, quietly rationing his own hunger so someone he loves gets to eat one more day. If you know a family struggling quietly right now, somewhere near you, check on them today, not tomorrow. Today, you might be the Miss Dolores they've been waiting for and never asked out loud.